This election, get ready with Political Prude, the podcast. In today's episode of our GE 2025 special, we're going to have a crash course on Singapore's political landscape. We'll go through a brief history of party politics in Singapore, look at who's who in today's party ecosystem, explore the roles of the ruling party and the opposition, and discuss how the structure of GRCs and SMCs impact election strategies. Basically, the baseline things that we should know entering these elections. I'm excited to have Professor Elvin Ong join us today. He's an assistant professor at the NUS Department of Political Science. His primary research agenda is on democratization and opposition politics in East and Southeast Asia. He's also published in numerous academic journals on this research topic as well. In 2022, he wrote Opposing Power, Building Opposition Alliances in Electoral Autocracies, a book that compares how opposition parties navigate dominant party systems in the Philippines, South Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore. I actually got to meet him prior to our conversation today to really discuss what actually we can cover this episode. And that conversation, even though it was very, very short, left me so inspired and excited for all of you to also get a chance to hear from him. Let's get into it. Professor Elvin, welcome to Political Prude, the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of the audience, we kind of want to know what is going on, right? But also don't have the time to, enroll in a course to, or go and do our own research and everything. So I think this show, in a way, and it's also for me as well, like the same value that it brings is that in just a few episodes, I'm able to understand better, right? And because it's GE, I do think that maybe the audience could benefit from understanding the political landscape a little bit more, But maybe before we begin, you could just give everybody a quick background on what you do.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I think this is a great opportunity to share with you from a kind of expert point of view, right? How I think elections and political parties work in general, but also maybe more specifically to Singapore's context for the upcoming general elections, right? You caught me at the right time because this semester I'm teaching a class at NUS called Elections and Political Parties.
Okay.
And you're right that I do study democratization and opposition parties in East and Southeast Asia generally. But if you were to kind of pinch me a bit more and force me to say, where do I actually study? I would say generally I focus on Philippines, South Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore.
Awesome. So when people discuss elections, they're always jumping right into who's fighting who, who's contesting who. But I think it's also important for us to understand the landscape and know where all it started from. So can you give us a brief history of party politics in Singapore and how it started and evolved since our independence?
Let's just start right at the beginning, right, where we got our independence from Malaysia, right? And at the time, the ruling party in government was, of course, the People's Action Party, and they were the majority party in the parliament. There were a couple of other opposition parties at the time as well. Most famously, of course, there was the Barisan Socialists, which actually came out from the PAP itself. And then there was also the Workers' Party alongside many other smaller opposition parties. So when we got independence in 1965, of course, that was the status quo of the Singapore legislature kind of remained until, I believe, in 1968, that we had our first ever general elections, right, to elect a new government. Now, approaching these general elections, what the opposition parties thought at the back of their minds was that they were actually very upset with Singapore's independence from Malaysia. They do not necessarily agree with Singapore's independence with Malaysia. They actually, many of them say they want to get back into Malaysia. And so what happened was that they refused to legitimize the elections at that time. And so therefore they chose to boycott the elections, right? So because of the boycott, the PAP was able to win 100% of the seats. And the PAP was able to win 100% of the seats for many election cycles after that, right? And all things started to change from the 1980s onwards, where we had Mr. J.B. Jeyaretnam being elected for the very first time in, I believe it was 1981. in the Anson by-election. And then, of course, Mr. Cham Si Tong got elected, I believe, in 1984 in Potong Pasir. So these were the two major opposition leaders who kind of stood toe-to-toe with the PAP government throughout the 1980s and 1990s. So things mostly stagnated around there until, of course, you have the 2008 general elections and 2011 general elections where the Workers' Party was able to win Aljunied GRC, right? Winning a GRC for the first time. And so that is the reason why we see the Workers' Party being the biggest opposition party in Singapore for the past few years.
I think most Singaporeans can name some political parties here and there, but I do think that there's more to the picture. So can you give us a quick rundown on who's who? Who are the key political parties in Singapore and how do they differ in terms of their approach?
Okay, so maybe what I can do is to try to use a few words and phrases to describe each political party. And then you and the audience decide how they might want to associate these political parties with these words and phrases, right? So let's start with the PAP, right? If you're thinking about the PAP, they are the ruling government. In political science, we call them the dominant ruling party.
Okay.
Right? They are dominant because they occupy a large proportion of the seats in the parliament, right? But in terms of ideology, they represent a couple of things. You could say that they represent meritocracy, they represent multiracialism, and they represent competency.
Okay.
So that's just a simple description of the PAP,
Fair.
right?
Yeah.
Fair. Hopefully reasonable, I guess.
Yeah.
For the Workers' Party, the main descriptor one could use for them is the largest opposition party in Parliament right now and in Singapore. And if you were to use a couple of phrases and words to describe them, some would say towards the left of the PAP, right? How much left depends on your further reading and your further diving into the substance. But from what I recall in the general elections of 2020, Minister Vivian Balakrishnan actually said that the Workers' Party was half a step to the left of the PAP. In fact, I believe he actually described the Workers' Party as both the Workers' Party and the PAP could actually write the same manifesto. It's just that they are half a step to the left, right? So that is something maybe that could be a fair representation of the Workers' Party, and that would potentially be something that you can dig further into. Then the Progress Singapore Party, some would say, again, based on the last general election, you could say, or they would claim that they are the old PAP, right? Because of Dr. Tan Cheng Bock, who was from the PAP, but he left the PAP a few years ago. And he claims to be the old PAP, whereby he embodied the values of the old PAP. To some extent, he believes that the current PAP has so-called lost its way, and therefore he wants to reinvigorate politics in Singapore through the Progress Singapore Party. Right? And then finally, we have maybe one last opposition party, the Singapore Democratic Party, led by Dr. Chee Soon Juan. You could say that the Singapore Democratic Party stands for human rights, stands for progressive politics, stands for more liberal politics. And these are words that have been associated with them over the past few years because Dr. Chee himself has been a very strong advocate for liberal democracy in Singapore, right? So Dr. Chee has written many books, and you can feel free to go and look at those books as well.
Understand. So earlier on, you mentioned how WP is half a step to the left of the PAP. So for people who don't really quite understand politics or don't follow politics, they may not really understand left and right. My understanding of it is from the US, whereby the right is a bit more conservative and the left is a bit more liberal. Does this apply to Singapore?
So this term of left and right is a general kind of ideological spectrum that political scientists use to analyze different political parties around the world. Right? So yes, the idea of a left political party is usually associated with the idea that they are more progressive liberal in terms of social values. And they are also more progressive liberal in terms of economic policies. So, for example, they may advocate for higher income taxes. They may advocate for a minimum wage, right? They would like these higher revenues for the government so that to redistribute to the poorer citizens in the country, right? So they will advocate for a larger welfare state. On the right is usually political parties that are associated with more conservative social values, as well as more conservative economic policies. So when you're talking about economic policies, you're talking about, say, smaller government intervention into the economy to allow for the free market to be more dominant in society, right? So everything is left to the free market. The government should not intervene, whatever it may be. So we should let the free market, for example, set rental prices. There should not be any intervention in capping rental prices, for example, right? So these are general kind of concepts that we use to kind of differentiate political parties, right? And in Singapore's context, the political parties, of course, represent different kind of policies, right? They oftentimes have big debates within their own member base about what their ideology should be. And every time they contest in general elections, they usually have a manifesto to tell voters what they represent and what they would like to change in terms of economic policies, in terms of social policies, moving forward into the future, right? And so hopefully they use these policies to attract voters to them, and voters who believe that these policies resonate with them will want to vote for them. And so as political scientists, as voters, right, we can read these policies and generally decide, well, do they conform more to the larger welfare state? Do they conform, or do they conform more to advocate for the free market, right? And then we can sort of place in our minds whether they are more left or more right in terms of economic policies, for example.
So what does the dynamic between the ruling party and the opposition actually look like in parliament and in practice?
Well, so I'm not a frequent visitor to parliament,
Okay.
so I won't be able to say, what the dynamic between the ruling party and opposition parties are like. But usually what happens in parliament is that the ruling party, they will propose legislation to the parliament, and then parliament will have a debate on the different legislation. For example, say the yearly budget, right? The government will table a budget, and there will be intense debate. So usually opposition parties will disagree with what the government is doing. Usually they will be much more critical of what the government is doing. And therefore there will be like kind of healthy debate with regards to what the government is proposing. Now, of course, sometimes debate can get pretty intense on the parliamentary floor. And so you can oftentimes see exasperated emotions. You can often see sometimes anger on the parliamentary floor, right? And that is usually par for the course because people have very strong convictions about certain policies. People are passionate about different kind of social issues, maybe, right? And so they may be very emotional in advocating for the government to change its policies and change its legislation one way or another. But of course, outside of parliament, in the parliamentary corridors, where people have their offices or meeting rooms, so on and so forth, I think most of the time the relationship is fairly cordial between the ruling party and the opposition parties. Particularly amongst the opposition parties, there may be, we might think that there may be some coordination amongst the opposition parties about what they would do, right? So that would be the general dynamic between the ruling party and opposition party.
So I think I was reading, I was watching another podcast, I think, and they were discussing horse trading. And that's a new term that I've never heard before, right?
Oh, you
and
never heard of horse trading?
I've never heard of that. And I was like, what are they talking about?
There are very few horses in Singapore to trade with each other.
So what exactly? Okay, so I think the context in which they were discussing that was strategy with regards to GE, right? And when you mentioned the relationship between various opposition parties, that was what made me remember that phrase. So what does horse trading mean, and how does that impact, a general election in Singapore?
So horse trading, that concept, that idea, is usually referring to a process whereby different opposition parties will negotiate with each other about where to contest in each electoral district. So, for example, Workers' Party will talk to the Progress Singapore Party, who will also talk to the Singapore Democratic Party to say, okay, if I contest in West Coast for the Progress Singapore Party, no other opposition party should contest in West Coast as well against the PAP, right? Let's just say the PAP contests in all electoral constituencies. So there is this negotiation process between different opposition parties. The idea of trading comes in where there's a conflict between different opposition parties. So maybe two opposition parties want to contest in one same district. And so then the question is, what do you do, right? So you might trade to say, well, maybe if you allow me to contest in constituency A, then I allow you to contest in constituency B, right? So as to have a fair exchange, equitable kind of outcome. Now, ultimately, why do opposition parties do such a thing, right? Why do they want to bargain and negotiate with each other where to contest? There are a couple of reasons, right? The first one is that there are too few constituencies for too many opposition parties that want to contest against the PAP. So they must try to negotiate somehow. And why do they want to negotiate? Well, if there are too many opposition parties contesting in one district, let's say, hypothetically, in, say, West Coast, right? Progress Singapore Party says they want to contest against the PAP, but maybe Red Dot United also wants to contest against the PAP. And maybe, say, hypothetically, Singapore Democratic Party also wants to contest against the PAP. Now, if you have three opposition parties contesting in one district against the PAP, you can imagine that the votes for the opposition parties will be very split, right? And the vote share for the opposition parties will all be very small, right? And so everybody minimizes their chance of winning, right? Which is the exact opposite of what you would think they want to do. They actually want to maximize their chances of winning. So in order to maximize their chances of winning, they should bargain and negotiate with each other to reduce the number of opposition parties contesting so that only one opposition party runs, so that all the opposition party votes will go to that one opposition party that is contesting in that district. And so then they maximize their chances of winning. They can concentrate their resources in a smaller amount of districts when they give way to each other, right? And therefore, ultimately, from this whole perspective, it is a very rational thing to do, right? You don't want to waste your money. You don't want to waste your resources competing against each other, right? You want to conserve the limited resources that you have, while at the same time maximizing your chances of winning. So, rational thing for opposition parties to do is actually to do this horse trading. And we actually see this process of horse trading happen across the world in many different countries. So the fact that it's happening in Singapore is of no surprise.
So we often hear that people say that competing in a GRC is actually harder for the opposition parties. And I'm just curious why. How does the structure of GRCs or SMCs shape or impact campaign strategies of the opposition parties? during elections?
Yeah, so again, we need to look at the challenges of an opposition party in Singapore vis-a-vis the PAP, right? So as you recall, the PAP is the dominant ruling party, so they have a lot of resources. They compete across the entire Singapore geographical map, right? So they don't leave any constituencies out. But for opposition parties, they have very limited resources. They have limited money. They have limited volunteers. They also have, say, limited kind of time, right, to reach out to voters, right? So if they contest in single-member constituencies, where there's only one opposition candidate contesting in one small single-member constituency, then they are able to use those resources wisely to concentrate their efforts on trying to persuade voters in that single-member constituency. However, if they contest in a group representative constituency, then they have to form a team. That means when they form a team, they have to garner more resources to cater to this team of, say, 5 political candidates. So they need more money. They need more time to coordinate with each other, where to walk the ground, to talk to different voters. And then they need more resources and volunteers to accompany these candidates to walk the ground. They need more volunteers to, say, maybe print posters, to print flyers, right, to distribute to the residents there. So just logistically, competing at a group representative constituency is much more tougher already for opposition parties. And so that's where the difference comes in. So, of course, if you're a more well-resourced opposition party, then you have more candidates, you have more money, then you're usually more capable of competing in GRCs. So GRCs really, I would say, hurt the very, very small opposition parties who have limited time and resources.
Understand. And I think recently, when the EBRC report, which outlines what are the new constituencies in Singapore, we found out that the ward that Dr. Chee Soon Juan was competing in got basically absorbed into a GRC. And then we saw him announcing that he would be going north and competing in another SMC. Obviously, this is speculation and he didn't give a reason why. But do you think this is one of the reasons as to why he decided not to form a GRC in a location where he has had, history with and momentum in, versus, deciding to contest in another SMC?
Yeah, I definitely think time and resources constrain the ability of opposition leader like Dr. Chee in reaching out to voters, right? So if he moves from one single-member constituency to another single-member constituency, he will be able to use those same resources to persuade the voters in the other single-member constituency to vote for him. So he's basically making use of his time and resources much more efficiently, right? Whereas in a GRC case, he will have to find, number one, team members to compete with him against the PAP in the GRC, right? So that's one resource already in the first place, right? More team members. Number two, he will have to find more resources and more time and volunteers, right? To help support his other team members to compete against the PAP. So again, that will be potentially much less effective and efficient for him to persuade those voters in the bigger GRC, right? So I think it's definitely kind of a resource question.
Hi, if you're learning from this episode, do me a favor, drop us a 5-star rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button. It takes 2 seconds, but it actually makes a huge, huge difference in getting more people to discover our conversations. All right, let's get back into it. So let's just go back to where we are today, right? And I think as I started thinking more and more about the role of the opposition in Singapore, And I was reading, and the reason why I started thinking about that is because I was reading how each party would talk, and sometimes I feel like maybe some of them don't really have the ambition to become the ruling party. All they really want is to be to keep the PAP in check, or so they say, right? So maybe my understanding is some parties maybe have the ambition to become as big as the PAP in time to come, and some really just want to be that check, with the current system in place. Is this a fair assessment to make?
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment to make. I think if you are, say, maybe evaluating the Workers' Party, what the Workers' Party has always said that their goal and ambition is that in the medium to long term, their ambition is to win more than 1/3 of the seats in Parliament, right? Not even to take over the PAP, but in the medium to long term is to win more than 1/3 of the seats in Parliament. Now, why is 1/3 important? 1/3 is important because that does not allow the PAP to change the constitution, right? So some people might believe that the constitution is a very sacred document and it should not be changed for flimsy reasons, right? I remember one student in my class said that the constitution should not be edited like a Google Doc, right? So therefore, in order to prevent the constitution from being changed all the time, right? The Workers' Party has that ambition. But currently, for the other opposition parties, I think everyone says, well, in the short to medium term, is still just to provide a check on the PAP. And I don't think anyone has come out to say that their real ambition is to totally topple and replace the PAP, because that seems quite a far-flung kind of scenario.
Understand. Okay. For young voters who are looking to understand how checks and balances work, it can feel a bit murky sometimes. So my question is, what is the role of the opposition in a system like ours? And how can it be effective even without forming the actual government?
Yeah, so when you talk about opposition parties in parliament, they usually say they want to provide a check and balance, right?
Yep.
So let's start from a baseline idea of check and balance as being part of a democratic system, as opposed to an autocratic system, right? So you can imagine in an autocratic system, let's say like China, right? They can impose any policy they want without consideration or consultation with anyone else in society. So, for example, they can say, "Oh, I want to ban all tuition centers," right?
Okay.
Which they did.
Yeah.
Or I want to limit all young people under 18 years old from playing too much computer games, and so only 1 hour per day from Friday to Saturdays and Sundays, right? Which they did. Right? They did so without any consultation with anyone. And they are able to do that because they're in an autocratic system. But in a democratic system, you usually have opposition parties to do more checks and balances. Now, what does checks and balances mean? Checks and balances mean that when a government proposes some legislation or some policies in parliament, the opposition parties can have the legitimate position to raise objections and say, hey, hang on a minute, right? This might not necessarily be so good for a certain segment of voters. This might not necessarily be so good for the environment, right? Or this might not necessarily be so good because of certain consequences down the road, right? And when the opposition parties voice these concerns, voice these objections, and or maybe even table their own motions in parliament, right? They are able to provide a second reference point from the government, right? To provide this second check on the government, to make the government reconsider, right? To see whether its policies or legislation can be improved or not. Now, after all, no one is perfect, right? And so the idea of checks and balance is the idea that no one is perfect and everybody needs a second check to check whether they are sure or not, whether they have considered the full consequences and facts of the case, right?
Understand. So you mentioned tabling a motion. So for those people who don't really understand Parliament, or how it works, very simply, could you just explain what that means and also clarify if even the opposition members can do so as well?
Yeah, so usually in Parliament, in the British system, the agenda in Parliament, right, is often prioritized and put forward by the ruling government of the day. So they table legislation to pass, they table motions to debate. But for opposition parties, they can also table motions, right, to debate. Motions are basically pieces of text, right, that spells out, say, maybe an opposition party's views on a particular thing, say maybe the cost of HDB flats, right, or the preserving the hawker culture in Singapore, right. So they can put up these paragraphs and ask the Parliament to have a debate about it. And through that debate, they are able to seek the government's views about their motion. They can get the opposition parties to state their stances on these particular issues, right? And that allows, again, for more inclusive policy making and debate in society. And so opposition parties have this power that is possible for them to use. And we have seen the opposition parties use these powers over the past few years. So if I recall correctly, both the Workers' Party and the Progressive Labour Party, they have tabled motions before.
Okay, the theme of our Political Prude GE2025 special is Get Ready, right? Get ready with me this election. So if you were to give everybody one simple step in their routine to get ready, what would that one step look like?
Oh, that's a difficult one because there are so many steps.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
I would say one small thing that young people or old people can do is to just read the headlines of what is happening in Singapore every day by taking, 2 minutes to scroll through the headlines of your favorite media platform. It could be the Straits Times, it could be the Channel News Asia, it could be Jom, it could be Rice, right? You don't have to read all the articles. I'm not asking you to do that. But just read the headlines and maybe read one paragraph of the headlines. And you can be surprised by how much you gain from just reading the headlines. By just reading the headlines, you can have a very good sense of like what is happening in society, and you can have a very good sense of what is going viral, right? In Singapore. And so I think by just taking some time out to read the headlines, you can be a much more informed citizen, and you can have a debate with your friends. You can do a lot of things. You can dive in deep to some headlines that you're interested in. And I think so just spending 1, 2, 3 minutes to scroll through the headlines every morning is just one step that people can do to get ready.
So, Prof. Elvin, before you go, I understand that you've written a book and it's been sitting right there the entire conversation. Can you share with our audience a little bit more about this book that you've worked on?
Okay, thank you. So this book is titled Opposing Power, Building Opposition Alliances in Electoral Autocracies. And it compares how different opposition parties form or do not form opposition alliances in the Philippines, South Korea, Malaysia, and Singapore. So if you're interested to get this book, you can get it on the University of Michigan Press website. You can buy it directly online from there. Or if you're a poor student and you can't pay, I think it's $30-something for the book, you can download it for free with the PDF online there as well. So thank you.
Well, I hope you learned something useful from Prof. Elvin because I sure did. Now, remember, this episode slots into our wider GE 2025 special, where we're going to be exploring this election from various angles, so be sure to check out our other episodes as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you found this breakdown useful, help us reach more people by hitting like, sharing, and subscribing for ongoing insights into Singapore's political scene. To stay connected and catch all our GE 2025 coverage, follow Political Prude on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and TikTok. Just search for Political Prude and you should be able to find our account. Alright, go binge all our other episodes now.